What's your favorite thing about being a clinical therapist, or if you could just do one thing all day, what would that be?
If I could do one thing, oh, well, I mean, what I would love to be able to do is just yoga therapy all day, every day. And so incorporating yoga, movement, and philosophies with clinical practices. So working on it for like anxiety, depression, that sort of thing. If I could do that all day, it'd be great.
What does that mean, yoga therapy? I think
So
people have imagination and it's going to go different directions when you think about it that way.
And it is different for everybody. So an example that I do some now is just being able to chat with someone, and we're just chatting at first, right? And then we're like, oh, just feel so stressed. And I'm like, oh, is there tension? Where's the tension in your body? And if someone notices a lot of tension in the shoulders, then we'll move into some more movement practice and what people would typically think of as yoga, like yoga asana, the movement. We might do some flows, warm up, do some vinyasa flow is my favorite flow. So it's very like moving with your breath. And then we may come down, do a little bit more breath work. I'll try and see how is that stress tension in their body. Usually it's decreased quite a lot. We'll talk about other things that they could do outside of our sessions like that. So that's how I use yoga therapy. It's different for everybody, but just noticing, because we carry things in our bodies, in our minds. And so we can use yoga asana, but also pranayama and the whole 8 limbs of yoga. We can use that to be able to move those things through our body. And so that's why it helps with anxiety, depression, and trauma is the 3 big things I would use yoga therapy for.
When I think about that, I always try to use self-application to myself, and think about how I would receive something, or how I would think about something if I were in a position of receiving that. And I think I don't want to think about myself now, but I want to think about myself, when I went to rehab 20 years ago or something like that. I want to think of that version of Ace. And I think that it would have been so esoteric, meaning so out of my realm of understanding. And mind you, this would be before, we've come a long ways in the information that's available to us with just even, books being published with the internet and everything like that, the information that's accessible to us regarding these subjects. But I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah. And there's a lot of people, for most people, it is esoteric. But I think there's a way to do it, because we all have a body of some sort, right? And so if you can help someone see that, connect that they're feeling stressed, and then notice like, oh, like my shoulders are up here, and you just have them like just release them down, then you're in. Like you've already caught someone's attention that, okay, something's connected. So I've worked with people where I would think they are not gonna want to do this at all. And humor, right, is to bring that into the room as well and be like, just humor me, just try it. Especially with breath work, I'll always start with just make your exhale really long. With kids, it can be like, imagine you're blowing in a balloon, make that exhale really long. So when you get people understanding that those little things, then you can build on it. So sometimes yoga therapy can happen very small at first, and you're just doing something for like 2 minutes. But then once you've started seeing someone for like 5 weeks, let's say, you start doing a lot more at that 5-week mark. So.
And how do you get somebody, I shouldn't say how do you get somebody, how do you help somebody that is unable to make the connection, never has made any of these connections, like you mentioned, the connection of mind-body, for example. Most people, I shouldn't say most people, but there's plenty of people out there in the world, myself, my past self included, that would have never even considered that they could have, maybe a little bit, but never really taken the idea seriously. And, how do you get that? How do you, just to push you a little further on that, how do you, how do you break that barrier? Because I think, you could say like, riding a bike, the first time, it could be when you're a kid, right? It seems so like it could be so hard and dangerous, but then the first time you do it, that's what I said, the first time it's like riding a bike. But I also think it's kind of like that when you can make that first little connection, when you open that window, that door, and somebody sees or feels that connection, and they're like, oh, why didn't I ever recognize that before? Why didn't I, like I would say this, like for me, I feel irritable and impatient with things. And then if I would have thought about what I had eaten that day, I would realize that the food that I put into my body earlier that day wasn't giving me what I needed, and actually was probably detrimental to how my mind was had a negative impact on the way that my mind was able to function. And I mean that literally. But I would have never made that connection back then at all. I would have never said to myself, you know, it's that simple. You could you could revolutionize my mind just by putting this down and picking this up and eating this instead.
But it's a process, because there's other things that have happened before that, you know, it's step by step. So I would say, as we know in social work, start where the person is that you're working with. And so for some people that do have some awareness with their body, then I would start more there. But some people that maybe think more scientifically, I would start there. I would go to the nervous system. I would pull up all kind of diagrams, and some people are really interested in that part and need to know the why before we do the practice. But some people are the other way around. So it's just knowing who you're working with as well. But then also, once you get to the point where you can practice, is practice together. Do those kind of easier ones, like the extended exhale. I always use that as an example because it's just easy. We can all do it. And then what I've also noticed is I will then have people that would talk in session, and they'll get kind of elevated. I can see their heart rate's probably going higher, the blood pressure's going higher. And then I'll see them do an extended exhale. And so every time I see it, I'm like, oh, you just did it. How did that feel? And so it's just like building on that, building and building, one step at a time. And like you've got to the point where you now notice your food and how that impacts your mind and your body. But before that came so many other different steps. And it's just being patient with ourselves, right? We just have to keep putting those steps in front of each other. It's going to go up and down. I like to say that rather than like going backwards and forwards, right? It's going to go up and down. But if we just keep moving forward, we'll get there in the end. It's a lifelong process though, right?
I don't know why, but you just evoked a couple of memories in me where I've interviewed or had dialogue with different therapists on the Critical Social Work podcast. And they have, in the process of talking about, you know, clinical practice, they've talked to me, or like breath work and things like that. They've been just like you, Christian, just like you, just like you're practicing right now. And I'm like, oh, I'm doing it. But I think that's the thing. Going back to things that are so simple that can seem so esoteric before you broach that gap or
like make that connection.
Yeah, make that connection. Breath. You know, I remember we had a guy when I was in rehab, and I don't know what year it was, 20 plus years ago. And this guy came in and he talked to us, I think, about yoga and breath work, but I can't remember for sure because I didn't really know what those things were back then. And I thought it was weird. And I just didn't even take him really too seriously. But I think maybe if I had him one-to-one and he could have talked to me in a situation like that, it could have been better. But little did I know, you know, I wish I would have taken it seriously back then, because later in life I've learned that, I mean, it's hard to like really rank things, but probably the number one tool I have in life is being aware of my breathing. Literally all the times, I can think of all the times I get angry at someone and I say something or do this, if I look at that situation, I am literally not breathing, or it's really shallow. And if I'm able to like just come back to the breath, I mean, and there's so many different, you got to contextualize it so many different ways, because it could be like you're stressed and you take a breath, or it could just be like, you know, when you wake up and you're able to like fill your air up or your lungs up with air and start that day. It could be, you know, knowing and practicing specific breath work, but it could also be just once you learn about breathing and you become aware of it, then it's like it becomes a part of your natural homeostasis. And when you return to that, you breathe like you've taught yourself to breathe versus how you would have in your old fight or flight situations. Not always, but I mean, you slowly get there. Does that make sense?
It totally makes sense. And that's why it's important to have, if you're going to use breath work, which I mean, it's just such a powerful tool, like you say, to have a consistent practice where you are intentionally doing it, then your body gets used to it. Like your nervous system then learns automatically, okay, my heart rate's going up. This is what I do. And not just automatically will want to reach that homeostasis, like you said. So, yeah. But one thing that came up in my mind, do you think that the person that came in when you were in rehab, he planted that seed? Because who knows if he hadn't, I know it was esoteric at the time, but it just seems to me that he planted the seed and it grew from there. And in your mind, it came to fruition much later, but.
Yeah, well, would say this, that if there was a seed that he planted, it lied dormant and was not germinated until much, because you're talking about it over,
Is it a long time?
well, let me think. So about 10 years, maybe
Okay.
a little bit longer, but about 10 years or so, a decade. And I really didn't think about that at all. It wasn't on my radar
Really?
at all. And I can't remember what pushed me over the line to try it, but I was up in Barrow, up on the Arctic Ocean, and working at the college up there, and I was the student wellness coordinator, and part of the job was to create recreational programs. Well, we have, as you can imagine, in a small town up in the Arctic, thousands of miles from any other city or anything like that. You don't have many resources, and so we tried. Do you remember Beachbody?
Oh yeah.
Beachbody. We did P90X. We did
Insanity.
Yeah, I remember I had everyone's calves on fire from the Insanity. But then wanted to try something different, and so we got yoga. And
How did you find that?
I don't remember exactly. I think I was trying to research some different things and was curious about it, and we did it, and it really changed my whole body over the years.
Yeah.
So I guess it's been 10 years now since, and I've never done it extendedly every day it's always been in spurts, but it really changed my body. I used to not be able to sleep, and I'd be stiff and my back would be sore, and never at all anymore. That's completely left.
You couldn't sit down, like cross-legged.
No, and I still just have some struggle with, like double-seated pigeon pose or some things with the hips. It's still always going to be tight to some degree, but because I just have a wide frame as well. But it totally transformed me. Even if you just looked at me sleeping back in the day, and you looked at me sleeping now, you'd see me now, like, being able to kind of curl up a little bit. And
Yeah. It transforms your body and your mind. So
it's hard to get somebody to know that it's that simple. And I guess it's not that simple, because yoga's freaking hard. If you're doing power yoga, the stuff there's lots of different kinds of yoga, but if you're talking about stuff that's going to get you in fit power yoga, it's no joke. It's hard stuff.
it is. And when you talk about the 8 limbs of yoga, which I always go back to, because it's so much more than just the movement, right? That's even harder, because that's a commitment to yourself, like on all levels, right? Not just your physical body, mental, spiritual, emotional. So